Think the darkest cinematic moments happen when actors are forced to do. The truth is far more twisted sometimes. They willingly cross the ultimate line. Today, we expose the most devastating Hollywood scandals, revealing the crushing psychological toll of unsimulated intimacy on closed sets. Driven by blind ambition, these co-stars abandoned the safety of scripts to chase a masterpiece. But when the cameras stopped, a horrifying reality hit. These unedited choices triggered international blacklists, shattered real-life marriages, and ruined careers overnight. They thought they controlled their art, only to trap their deepest vulnerabilities on celluloid forever. Welcome to Hollywood Stars and Scars. For proof, look no further than a panicked actor staring into a bathroom mirror, realizing he was about to make a permanent mistake. Let's begin with Karl Glusman and Aomi Muyock.
Behind the glitter, the scars remain. Welcome to Hollywood Stars and Scars.
Number 15. Karl Glusman and Aomi Muyock, The Dangerous Confession on Gaspar Noé's set. Karl Glusman was a young, ambitious actor when he arrived in Paris to star as Murphy in Gaspar Noé's 2015 relationship drama Love. Alongside co-star Aomi Muyock, he was thrust into a production that promised to discard all cinematic safety nets by capturing completely unsimulated intimacy. But as the filming schedule progressed, the sheer weight of that creative decision began to feel overwhelming. Glusman later recalled a moment of acute panic on set, retreating to a bathroom just to look at himself in the mirror and try to summon the courage to continue. His heart pounded as his mind screamed that this was a huge mistake and that he should run away immediately. Yet he faced an agonizing conflict he deeply feared letting down the crew who had worked so hard, and he was plagued by the thought that if he quit, another actor would step into his place, leaving him with a lifetime of regret. So he stepped back onto the set, and the camera captured the unchoreographed truth of the moment. When the finished film debuted at the Cannes Film Festival, it sparked an immediate storm of media coverage, with critics and audiences debating where artistic expression ended and mere exhibitionism began. Away from the flashing lights, the personal aftermath of that choice was far more complicated than the public realized, exposing the silent, intense pressure that young actors face when trying to prove their dedication to a demanding director. It is a recurring pattern in the history of independent cinema, this sudden, high-stakes realization that once your most private moments are committed to celluloid, they belong to the world forever. In fact, years before Glusman stood before that bathroom mirror, another highly respected performer would find himself facing that exact same compromise, enduring immense pressure on an intensely closed set, only to watch the resulting scandal ripple painfully through his real-life marriage. Number 14. Kerry and Mark Rylance, the Oscar winner's deepest on-screen regret. In 2001, French director Patrice Chéreau sought to dismantle the emotional distance of modern relationships with his English-language drama Intimacy. Starring the highly respected stage performer Mark Rylance and acclaimed actress Kerry, the film was designed as an unflinching, raw study of urban alienation. However, the decision to capture actual, unsimulated physical intimacy on screen quickly shifted the production from an artistic experiment into a deeply taxing personal ordeal for both leads. While the camera rolled on a closed set, the actors performed an unsimulated, intimate scene that lasted only seconds on screen, but left a lasting impact behind the scenes. Rylance later admitted that he felt undue pressure from the director to go through with the act, confessing that at that point in his career, he lacked the self-assurance to stand his ground and say no. The psychological strain of the scene was immediate, stripping away the traditional boundaries that usually protect a performer's private life. The public fallout was swift and unforgiving, as sensationalist tabloid coverage of the film's release put an immense strain on Rylance's marriage. Meanwhile, Kerry's real-life partner published a highly personal piece in The Guardian, detailing the intense jealousy and emotional distress he experienced watching his partner's real intimacy immortalized on celluloid. Though the film went on to win prestigious accolades at the Berlin Film Festival, including the Golden Bear, the emotional price paid by its creators remained a quiet, heavy burden. This painful clash between artistic demands and personal relationships exposes how easily the lens can turn a creative triumph into a domestic crisis. But while Rylance and Fox fought to preserve their private lives from tabloid exploitation, other performers would find themselves facing an even more aggressive institutional threat, where a major public broadcaster threatened to terminate a career entirely over the simple decision to step in front of the camera. Number 13. Sook-Yin Lee and Paul Dawson, the scandal that almost ruined her entire career. In 2006, Sook-Yin Lee was a highly celebrated media personality in Canada, widely recognized as a charismatic host for the public broadcaster, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. But when director John Cameron Mitchell began casting for Short Bus, an indie film exploring emotional healing through unsimulated physical intimacy, Lee made a bold decision to join the cast as Sophia, alongside co-star Paul Dawson. The project was designed as a therapeutic exploration of human vulnerability, but the corporate world was entirely unprepared for the reality of what would be captured on camera. As word of the film's explicit nature leaked before its release, the institutional backlash was immediate and severe. CBC executives, shocked by her participation in unsimulated intimacy, threatened to terminate Lee's contract immediately, viewing her artistic choice as a direct violation of their broadcast standards. Overnight, Lee found her hard-earned career on the verge of complete ruin, forced to defend her personal autonomy and artistic integrity against a massive corporate machine. What followed was an unprecedented wave of public solidarity that transformed a local employment dispute into a global battle for artistic freedom. Iconic filmmakers, including Francis Ford Coppola, stepped forward to champion Lee's right to perform, while Mitchell and the cast publicly defended the film's genuine, non-exploitative, therapeutic intent. Under immense public pressure and facing a widespread advocacy campaign, the broadcaster eventually backed down, allowing Lee to keep her job and turning Short Bus into a historic victory against corporate censorship. Defying the industry's predatory patterns, Principal fiercely denied all rumors of surgical intervention, proving that her timeless appearance was not the result of a surgeon's blade. Quote, "She credited her radiant, youthful look entirely to a highly disciplined, healthy lifestyle and her own revolutionary skincare line." Quote, "In a town that routinely breaks its legends, the truest victory is surviving on your own terms." Perfect sci-fi fantasy image during the filming of The Empire Strikes Back only deepened her reliance on substances, fracturing her fragile reality behind the studio's tight-lipped silence. Number 12. Tatsuya Fuji and Eiko Matsuda, the forbidden cult masterpiece that got them blacklisted. In 1976, Japan's strict post-war censorship laws faced an unprecedented challenge when director Nagisa Oshima set out to adapt the historical, tragic story of Sada Abe in the Realm of the Senses. To portray this intense, historic obsession, leading actors Tatsuya Fuji and Eiko Matsuda made the momentous decision to discard all theatrical simulation on set. They committed to absolute, raw, physical realism, knowing that local authorities were actively monitoring productions for any breach of public decency. The production quickly became a high-wire act of legal evasion, as the director realized that developing the film footage within Japanese borders would lead to immediate confiscation and potential arrests. To save their work, the crew had to secretly smuggle the raw, unprocessed film canisters out of Japan and fly them to France, where editing and processing could be completed safely, away from local censors. This desperate behind-the-scenes maneuver successfully preserved the footage, but it could not protect the actors from the storm waiting for them back home. When the finished film debuted internationally, the public backlash in Japan was swift, severe, and deeply unequal. While Tatsuya Fuji's career managed to survive the initial media outrage, Eiko Matsuda faced a devastating level of social ostracism. Society placed the entire moral burden of the performance on her, resulting in a systemic blacklist that effectively terminated her domestic acting career and forced her to permanently leave her home country in exile. Matsuda's permanent exile stands as a chilling reminder of the unequal, high-stakes consequences that performers face when they cross the boundaries of societal tolerance. Yet as the decades passed, the battleground of unsimulated cinema shifted from highly conservative Eastern societies to the heart of the Western art house scene, where a new generation of British filmmakers would test whether a modern audience was truly ready for the unedited reality of human connection. Number 11. Kieran O'Brien and Marggo Stilly, the extreme scene that crossed the line. Kieran O'Brien and Marggo Stilly were cast in the 2004 British independent drama 9 Songs, a film that would challenge the very boundaries of theatrical exhibition. While O'Brien was an experienced actor, Stilly had no professional acting background at all when she agreed to portray one half of a couple whose entire relationship is tracked through musical concerts and raw, private moments. The production stripped away every traditional layer of performance, choosing to capture completely unsimulated physical closeness without any visual tricks, lighting, shields, or cinematic illusions. On the set, the atmosphere was surprisingly quiet. Stilly approached the extreme demands of the script with an unexpected calm, later explaining that she viewed the production as an honest exploration of connection rather than a public display. To her, the actions captured by the camera felt entirely ordinary, a sentiment echoed by O'Brien, who argued that the film simply depicted adults behaving exactly as they do behind closed doors. They believed they were demystifying human intimacy, but mainstream audiences and censors were shocked by this refusal to hide behind the safety of a script. The film's release triggered a massive cultural battle over where theatrical standards should be drawn. Critics and cultural commentators publicly clashed over whether 9 Songs belonged in commercial cinemas, or if it had crossed a line into explicit exhibitionism. Yet, despite the intense media storm, the film refused to apologize or justify its creative choices, letting its quiet, unedited realism stand as a permanent statement. While Stilly, a newcomer to the industry, managed to navigate this intense exposure with calm resolve, the psychological weight of such raw honesty could have a vastly different effect on other performers. Just a few years later, an ambitious young actor on the cusp of global superstardom would make a similar decision to reject simulation for a quiet biographical film, only to discover that exposing his true self to the lens would leave him deeply shaken, questioning his entire future in front of the camera. Number 10. Robert Patson, the indie film role that almost ended his career. Long before he became a household name leading major Hollywood blockbusters, Robert Patson was a young actor, navigating the precarious margins of independent cinema. In 2008, he signed on to portray a young, tormented Salvador Dali in the quiet biographical film Little Ashes, a project that explored art repression and identity. It was a role that demanded immense emotional restraint, where long silences carried far more weight than any dialogue, and where the character's inner conflict required a level of vulnerability that few actors would ever dare to show. To convey the artist's intense inner struggle, the script called for a deeply personal, intimate moment of self-pleasure. Rather than relying on traditional cinematic distance protective barriers or camera tricks, Patson made a high-risk decision to capture the moment with absolute authenticity. He later confirmed openly that there was no illusion or substitution. What the lens captured was entirely real. Delivering his explanation with dry humor, he joked that his most private expression was now permanently committed to film. But behind the laughter lay a profound professional risk for an actor who did not yet have the security of long-term success. The quiet, uncomfortably intimate scene was shot without dramatic music or heightened buildup, forcing the audience to sit in silent, heavy discomfort. The critical response was deeply divided. While some praised Patson's fearless honesty, others questioned whether such extreme realism was truly necessary to tell the story. For Patson himself, the emotional toll of that vulnerability was incredibly heavy, later admitting that the intensity of the experience left him deeply shaken and made him briefly consider walking away from acting entirely. Yet Patson's willingness to confirm the absolute truth of his on-screen exposure represents a rare moment of clarity in an industry built on secrets. More often, Hollywood prefers to leave its audiences trapped in a maze of whispers, where the intense physical chemistry between two co-stars can be manipulated behind the scenes to create a compelling, unverified rumor that distracts the public from much larger scandals. Number 9. Sienna Miller and Hayden Christensen. The speculation that fooled all of Hollywood. Sienna Miller and Hayden Christensen stepped onto the set of Factory Girl, aiming to capture the fragile, chaotic world of 1960s icon Edie Sedgwick. On paper, the project was designed as a standard biographical character study, but the raw, unchoreographed energy between the two leads quickly took on a life of its own. When the film finally reached theaters, audiences were startled not by dramatic outbursts, but by a heavy, exhausted closeness that felt far too sincere to be rehearsed. This intense on-screen realism immediately ignited a wildfire of public speculation that the actors had crossed the ultimate professional boundary. Tabloids and industry insiders traded whispers that the intimacy captured by the lens was entirely unsimulated, turning the film's release into a media circus. Miller addressed the mounting rumors with careful precision, explaining that the crushing weight felt by viewers was simply the result of physically exhausting, emotionally demanding acting, rather than crossed lines. Christensen, meanwhile, chose absolute silence, refusing to feed the media frenzy by engaging with the speculation at all. However, the truth behind the gossip machine was far more calculated than a simple misunderstanding of screen chemistry. Reports later circulated that outside parties had deliberately allowed and even encouraged the unsimulated rumors to spread in order to shield other cast members from separate damaging scandals. In an industry where perception is often weaponized, the actors' genuine performances became a convenient smokescreen, leaving the film to exist forever in a gray space where public belief completely overshadowed physical proof. This deliberate exploitation of raw chemistry proved that Hollywood often values controversy over artistic honesty, weaponizing simulated rumors to create chaos. Yet, far from the calculated whispers of studio politics, another independent production would attempt to strip away the sensationalism entirely. In 2005, a quiet drama would reject the need for media smokescreens, choosing instead to capture unsimulated physical closeness with such a quiet, non-judgmental softness that it became a radical act of pure gentleness. Number 8. Lauren Lee Smith and Eric Balffor for the radical act of gentle and soft realism. In 2005, a quiet drama titled Lie With Me arrived in theaters without the massive marketing campaigns or the manufactured controversy-driven hype that usually accompanied explicit cinema. Starring Lauren Lee Smith and Eric Balffor, the film offered a raw, conversational portrait of a relationship completely stripped of Hollywood fantasy. Rather than relying on dramatic milestones or grand gestures, the production focused on two people who simply refused to hide their vulnerabilities from one another. To capture this extreme level of emotional exposure, the production chose to film several intimate scenes entirely without simulation. The director emphasized absolute trust and communication above all else, enforcing closed sets where the crew presence was kept to a bare minimum. By prioritizing comfort and consent, the filmmakers sought to create a secure environment where the performers could safely navigate the intense physical demands of the script. Smith later reflected on the experience, clarifying that the project was a genuine study in realism rather than an attempt at cheap provocation, admitting the process was emotionally demanding rather than thrilling. Balffor echoed her sentiments, stating that such intense physical closeness required deep mutual respect and highly disciplined, careful boundaries. Consequently, the film bypassed public outrage, instead generating quiet, respectful discussions among critics, who praised the natural performances and the lack of distance between the characters and the audience. This unique focus on soft, non-judgmental intimacy suggested that unsimulated realism did not need loud spectacle or aggressive shock value to carry profound artistic weight. But while this closed set offered a sanctuary of mutual consent, other directors would approach unsimulated cinema as an active, uncompromising confrontation. In another corner of the independent film world, a notorious provocateur would challenge his actors to reject the safety of CGI and digital doubles, demanding they step directly into a raw, unfiltered physical truth. Number 7. Shia LaBeouf and Stacey Martin rejecting CGI and green screens for absolute truth. When Lars von announced Nymphomaniac, the film industry braced itself for a work designed specifically to push emotional and physical boundaries. Originally, the production team planned to utilize digital effects, green screens, and body doubles to create the illusion of physical closeness, maintaining a clear separation between the actors' real lives and their on-screen characters. However, Shia LaBeouf and Stacey Martin decided to reject these digital safety nets. Pushing for absolute physical authenticity, both actors insisted that the intimate scenes should be lived rather than manufactured. LaBeouf was highly vocal about this radical commitment, openly advocating for a process that discarded shortcuts, while Martin, a relative newcomer to the industry, trusted the highly controlled and carefully discussed nature of the closed set. When the film was released, it instantly divided audiences and critics, shifting the conversation from the narrative itself to the stark ethics of its production. Yet, unlike other controversial films of the era, the defining feature of Nymphomaniac was its absolute transparency. The director and his cast chose to openly defend their methods, transforming what could have been a cheap publicity stunt into a serious artistic debate about where performance ends and lived experience begins. This open transparency meant that both LaBeouf and Martin stepped in front of the lens with complete clarity, fully aware of the reality they were capturing. But this mutual understanding is a luxury not every performer has been granted in the history of cinema. Decades earlier, a young, trusting actress would step onto a brightly colored musical set, completely unaware that the playful fantasy she had signed up for was merely a cover for a deceptive contract trap designed to capture her real vulnerability without her full consent. Number 6. Christine DeBelle and Alan Novak, the deceptive contract that tricked an innocent actress. In 1976, a young and trusting actress named Christine DeBelle stepped onto the brightly colored set of a musical adaptation of Alice in Wonderland, believing she was participating in a playful, slightly strange adult fantasy. With an earnest, wide-eyed quality that defined her early career, DeBelle seemed ideal to lead the surreal production alongside director and co-star Alan Novak, who guided her through the film's whimsical world as the White Rabbit. But behind the catchy songs and vibrant backdrops, the production quietly crossed boundaries that she never anticipated, turning a whimsical project into a deceptive contract trap. As filming progressed, several scenes meant to suggest physical closeness were captured without any theatrical illusion or camera tricks. Instead of choreographing a safe simulation, the production recorded real, unsimulated physical acts on camera. The turning point arrived when the film released to massive commercial success, performing exceptionally well financially, while leaving film critics and audiences deeply divided and confused over whether they were watching artistic provocation or outright exploitation. The true aftermath of the project emerged in later interviews, where DeBelle candidly revealed that she had not been fully informed about how far the film would actually go. This stark gap between her initial expectations and the permanent, unedited artifact committed to celluloid cast a long, uneasy shadow over her subsequent career. It became a haunting case study of what happens when a performer is not allowed to define her own boundaries, exposing a profound lack of oversight and care behind the scenes. This unsettling history of deception highlights the vulnerability of actors when they are kept in the dark by those in power. Yet, decades later, a different cinematic partnership would approach absolute realism from a place of complete, uncompromised transparency. Two of Hollywood's most acclaimed performers would choose to abandon their script and step onto a cleared set, proving that the most intense emotional and physical exposure could be achieved not through tricks or traps, but through a shared commitment built on absolute mutual trust. Number 5. Halle Berry and Billy Bob Thornton, the unscripted moment of pure trust. In 2001, the bleak, grief-stricken world of Monsters Ball required a profound level of human connection to anchor its tragic narrative. Starring Halle Berry and Billy Bob Thornton as two broken souls brought together by shared loss, the production demanded an emotional honesty that went far beyond standard Hollywood drama. To achieve this, the two actors made a crucial decision before stepping onto the set. They would abandon their strict, rehearsed choreography entirely, choosing instead to let raw, unchoreographed emotion dictate their physical interaction. On a strictly cleared set, Berry insisted on a fundamental rule. She would only perform the scene if the emotional vulnerability was shared absolutely equally between both co-stars. What unfolded under the rolling cameras was a moment where the physical boundary between performance and reality completely dissolved, leaving early viewers stunned by the raw intensity of the exchange. The production team initially compiled an even more intense unreleased cut of the scene, which early viewers described as overwhelming rather than dramatic, forcing editors to trim the footage down to meet commercial release standards. When the film reached theaters, the sheer realism of the sequence instantly ignited intense public speculation, generating persistent rumors of unsimulated physical acts. Although neither Berry nor Thornton ever confirmed or denied these claims, the scene followed them for decades, resurfacing in every retrospective interview. Yet, this unsettling realism also brought historic success, as Berry's raw exposure earned her historic recognition at the Academy Awards, proving that pushing the absolute limits of trust could occasionally yield industry-defining art. This classic cinematic moment showed that when a set is cleared and trust is absolute, actors can convince an entire audience that they have crossed into reality. But while Berry and Thornton navigated this intense vulnerability under the gaze of a neutral crew, other performers would find their most intimate moments directed by someone far closer to home. In a highly discussed television production years later, the boundary of trust would be tested in an entirely different way when an actress was called to perform a startlingly natural scene directed not by a distant filmmaker, but by her own real-life husband. Number 4. Anna Paquin and Joe Manganiello. The intimate scene, directed by her real-life husband. In the later seasons of True Blood, Anna Paquin had already built a reputation for intense, boundary-pushing performances. Her character shared chemistry with many partners across the series, but when Joe Manganiello entered the story, the on-screen connection felt different. Not louder, not exaggerated, simply more natural. What fueled the speculation was the person behind the camera. Paquin's real-life partner, Stephen Moyer, directed the episode. Every glance, every pause, every movement carried an unfiltered quality that made viewers lean closer. Fans began asking the same question. Was this still performance, or had something crossed into reality? Neither Paquin nor Manganiello ever confirmed anything specific. That silence only kept the discussion alive. Paquin later joked in interviews about how unusual the situation was, yet she never dismissed the rumors outright. Moyer leaned into humor, saying trust was the foundation of both his marriage and his work. The set remained controlled, the performers appeared comfortable, the director understood the emotional stakes better than anyone watching from home. Unlike many entries on this list, there was no public fallout. No regrets shared years later. No careers derailed. The moment simply existed as one of those scenes that made audiences pause and question how much realism they were witnessing. True Blood thrived on blurred lines, fantasy and humanity, desire and danger. This scene fit that identity. Whether anything beyond performance occurred almost became secondary. What mattered was that the audience believed it. Belief, however, is not the same as confirmation. And in another quiet French film released the same year, the camera would refuse even the safety of belief, choosing instead to observe without judgment as Christophe Paou's presence turned a peaceful lakeside into something far more unsettling. Number 3. Christophou and co-stars, the quiet thriller where performance disappeared. The tranquil shores of a secluded French lake served as the deceptively peaceful backdrop for director Alain Guihaudy's 2013 suspense drama, Stranger by the Lake. The film drops viewers into a quiet world where sunlight glints off the water and trees sway gently. But beneath this calm exterior, a chilling mystery slowly unfolds. The story follows a tight-knit group of men who gather at this isolated spot, day after day, repeating the same conversations and habits until one of them suddenly vanishes, forcing the community to confront a quiet, unsettling threat. Christophe Paou stars as a magnetic, enigmatic stranger whose dangerous charm draws others in, even as warning signs suggest they should run. What set this quiet thriller apart was the director's uncompromising refusal to rely on theatrical suggestion. Guihaudy insisted on absolute realism for several intimate scenes, stripping away all shortcuts and visual shields to remove any emotional distance between the audience and the characters. Paou and his co-stars performed these moments without simulation, committing to a raw authenticity that divided viewers. Some praised the film's artistic courage, while others felt deeply unsettled by how calmly the camera presented raw desire alongside mounting danger. The film went on to win prestigious awards, celebrated for its unique blend of tension and quiet dread, but the personal cost for the actors was immense. Paou later described the performance as emotionally draining rather than thrilling, an experience that offered no easy closure and left the audience suspended in lingering uncertainty. Yet, while Paou's characters ignored the danger signs of the lake in pursuit of an irresistible connection, another fearless actress would face a far more immediate and hostile confrontation. 10 years earlier, she would step onto a Cannes red carpet only to be met with a deafening wall of anger for making a similarly uncompromised creative choice. In the early 2000s, Vincent Gallo wrote, directed, and starred in The Brown Bunny, a low-budget road film that followed a solitary motorcyclist across America. Chloe Sevigny took the central female role, appearing in a single extended sequence near the end that the production filmed without cuts, body doubles, or simulated effects. Both performers later stated the moment was captured exactly as it happened, with no additional staging. Number 2. Chloe Sevigny and Vincent Gallo, the brutal backlash that shocked the Cannes Film Festival. The film premiered at the 2003 Cannes Film Festival. Within hours, the reaction turned sharply negative. Critics walked out. Reviews dismissed the work as self-indulgent and the sequence as an unnecessary exposure of its lead actress. Gallo publicly argued with reviewers, defending the choice as an honest portrayal of loneliness and desire. Sevigny, for her part, described the collaboration as a creative partnership she had entered willingly. Yet, she later admitted she had underestimated how permanently the public would fixate on that one scene. A re-edited version of the film was released the following year. One prominent critic who had attacked the original reversed his position, praising the quieter cut. The controversy, however, never fully faded. Sevigny continued to stand by the decision, while noting that the experience taught her how unforgiving audiences could be when the line between performance and private vulnerability appeared to dissolve. The episode left a lasting mark on both careers. Gallo's reputation as an uncompromising independent filmmaker hardened, while Sevigny's choice became a permanent reference point in discussions of on-screen intimacy. What Cannes registered as shock in 2003 would reappear a decade later in a different form. Longer takes, greater emotional demand, and an even heavier personal cost for the two women who carried the weight of another Palme d'Or contender. Number 1. Adèle Exarchopoulos and Léa Seydoux, the heavy emotional cost of achieving Cannes Gold. Cannes, May 2013. Two relatively unknown actresses, Adèle Exarchopoulos and Léa Seydoux, stood on the stage after Blue is the Warmest Color received the Palme d'Or. The film, directed by Abdelatif Kechiche, traced a years-long relationship through ordinary moments rather than dramatic peaks. What set the production apart was the director's insistence on extended, repeated takes designed to capture emotional realism without interruption or artifice. Exarchopoulos later described the process as exhausting, saying the long hours and persistent direction blurred the boundary between performance and personal exposure. Seydoux spoke of the discomfort that came from the absence of emotional distance during those sequences. Reports from the set and subsequent interviews indicated that the same scenes were filmed over and over, sometimes for days, in pursuit of a raw authenticity the director believed could not be achieved any other way. The film's critical success was immediate and substantial. Yet the awards season that followed brought a parallel conversation. Commentators and industry observers questioned the physical and psychological demands placed on the performers. Some praised the result as a landmark of intimate cinema. Others asked whether the cost to the actors had been fully weighed. Neither actress publicly accused the production of misconduct, but both made clear that the experience left a lasting imprint on how they viewed the limits of what could be asked in the name of art. In the years that followed, the debate around blue is the warmest color became a reference point whenever discussions of on-screen intimacy and director authority arose. The Palme d'Or remained, the performances were celebrated, and the questions about process never entirely disappeared. The same festival that had once erupted over a single, uninterrupted sequence now found itself examining a different kind of endurance, one measured not in minutes of screen time, but in the cumulative weight of repeated emotional exposure that two young women carried long after the lights of Cannes went out. We applaud cinema for capturing raw, unfiltered truth, yet we rarely question the unseen cost of that capture. When the screen fades to black, the audience simply walks away, but the performers are left to inhabit the emotional wreckage of what they permanently surrendered to the lens. This unseen aftermath challenges our very consumption of entertainment. It asks us to look past the illusion of a masterpiece and recognize the fragile human beings behind it. Because while art might be eternal, the psychological scars required to create it are equally permanent. Perhaps the real tragedy isn't just what was captured on film, but what we as an audience have collectively normalized. It leaves a haunting question: the next time you applaud a cinematic masterpiece, whose unseen sacrifice are you actually cheering for? I'd love to read your unfiltered thoughts. Drop your take on these Hollywood scandals down below. If exposing the dark, behind-the-scenes reality of toxic sets shifted your perspective today, leave a like and subscribe to Hollywood Stars and Scars. Until our next deep dive, protect your own peace, stay sharp, and have an absolutely brilliant day. The screen may go dark, but the truth never sleeps. What if some of Hollywood's greatest movies were hiding nightmares the audience was never supposed to see? Behind the glamour, applause, and legendary performances were collapsing stars, secret medical battles, dangerous productions, unfinished films, and final scenes that became horrifyingly real, only after the cameras stopped. Today, on Hollywood Stars and Scars, we're exposing a collection of disturbing tragedies from classic Hollywood, where movie history collided with real-life crisis. These are the celebrity tragedies, on-set disasters, hidden illnesses, final performances, and behind-the-scenes stories that studios could never completely erase. Some stars pushed through unimaginable physical limits. Others never returned to finish what they started. And in several cases, the movie itself became an accidental farewell preserved forever on film. The darkest part, audiences had no idea what they were really watching.
Behind the glitter, the scars remain. Welcome to Hollywood Stars and Scars.
Number 20. Lon Chaney, the film that destroyed his health. Winter 1929. On the set of Thunder Lawn, Chaney was no longer hiding behind the elaborate makeup that had made him Hollywood's legendary Man of a Thousand Faces. Playing a hard-driving railroad engineer, he worked through punishing snow sequences as production pushed forward. During filming, Chaney developed pneumonia, and accounts later described artificial snow becoming lodged in his throat and contributing to a serious infection. What looked like another demanding performance was becoming something far more consequential. Then came the discovery no studio illusion could disguise. By late 1929, Chaney had been diagnosed with bronchial lung cancer. It would be misleading to claim Thunder caused the disease, but the illness and complications surrounding the production marked a brutal turning point in his health. Still, Chaney returned to MGM. The silent film giant was about to face Hollywood's newest challenge, his own voice. In 1930, The Unholy Three became Chaney's first and only talking picture. He reportedly performed multiple distinct voices himself, proving that the arrival of sound had not made his extraordinary range obsolete. Audiences were witnessing what could have been the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Instead, it became his farewell. 7 weeks after the film's release, Chaney died following a throat hemorrhage at just 47. Thunder did not create every battle Chaney faced, but it became the eerie dividing line between the star at full force and the final months of his career. The man famous for suffering beneath masks had reached a limit makeup could never conceal. And Hollywood's next dark set would reveal an equally unsettling image, another screen legend finishing his scenes while oxygen waited just beyond the camera. Number 19. Boris Karloff. He needed oxygen between takes. By the spring of 1968, Boris Karloff had nothing left to prove to Hollywood, yet he kept reporting for work. Emphysema had severely limited his breathing, arthritis made movement difficult, and an oxygen tank accompanied him on set. During the back-to-back filming of his final, low-budget horror productions in Los Angeles, Karloff often rested in a wheelchair between setups, breathing oxygen until the cameras were ready. Then came the remarkable transformation. He would rise, compose himself, and become the commanding figure audiences still expected to see. That contrast made his late career almost more haunting than the monsters he had once played. Only months earlier, targets had turned Karloff's age into part of the story, casting him as Byron Orlock, an old horror icon who believes his kind of screen terror has become obsolete. What audiences could not fully see was how closely fiction was brushing against reality. The actor portraying a man contemplating the end of an era was himself working through serious physical limitations. Retirement would have been understandable. Karloff chose another path. He completed scenes for 4 productions intended to be finished in Mexico with his material filmed in California because his health made the original travel plan impractical. Even when seated for much of the work, his unmistakable voice and presence could still dominate a frame. Some of those movies would not reach audiences until after he was gone, turning performances filmed within weeks into echoes released across several years. On February 2, 1969, Karloff died at 81 after developing pneumonia. The monster had never been the frightening part of his final chapter. It was the image outside the frame, oxygen waiting while an aging professional prepared for one more take. But the next Hollywood farewell would be harder to detect. There would be no famous horror makeup and no oxygen tank defining the image, only an elegant star continuing to perform while a devastating illness quietly began taking away the abilities that had helped make him famous. Number 18. David Niven. His final roles hid a devastating illness. The warning signs arrived quietly disguised by the polished charm David Niven had carried through decades of Hollywood. During the making of Better Late Than Never, those around him noticed that walking had become difficult, and his famously elegant speech was beginning to change. Tests eventually identified amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, a progressive motor neuron disease. On camera, however, Niven remained unmistakably Niven, witty, controlled, and determined not to let the audience see how much effort ordinary movement was beginning to demand. The cruelest change attacked one of his greatest weapons, his voice. In 1982, Niven returned as the sophisticated Sir Charles Lytton for the final Pink Panther productions. His speech had weakened so dramatically that impressionist Rich Little was brought in to dub his dialogue. The face belonged to the Oscar-winning star audiences remembered, but portions of the voice coming from the screen no longer did. Few images capture the strange illusion of Hollywood more sharply than that. Even then, retirement was not immediate. Better Late Than Never became his final leading role, while Curse of the Pink Panther ultimately stood as his last film appearance. Away from the set, his condition continued progressing rapidly. Niven, a man whose screen identity had been built on effortless sophistication, was confronting an illness that steadily challenged speech, strength, and mobility. He died at his home in Switzerland on July 29, 1983, at 73. For decades, David Niven made elegance look effortless. His final performances revealed just how much effort could exist behind that illusion. Hollywood preserved the smile, the tailored suits, and the familiar silhouette, even as the man inside them was losing abilities the camera once took for granted. Yet the next farewell would leave an even stranger imprint, a celebrated actor entering his final movie without realizing just how closely that role would come to resemble a goodbye. Number 17, Richard Burton. His last film became a haunting farewell. There is something unnervingly final about Richard Burton's entrance in 1984. His hair is cropped close, his face looks heavier with age, and that unmistakable Welsh voice arrives with controlled menace. Burton was only 58, yet years of serious health problems had already taken a visible toll. Cast as O'Brien, the sophisticated interrogator who slowly reveals the machinery behind Orwell's nightmare, Burton no longer needed explosive theatrics. Stillness did the damage. The production unfolded around London from April through June 1984, matching the very months imagined in George Orwell's novel. Reports from the set describe Burton struggling at times with his lines while his health was deteriorating. Yet the finished performance remains chillingly precise. Opposite John Hurt, he turned quiet conversations into psychological traps, making O'Brien feel less like a conventional villain than a man who already knows resistance is doomed. Burton never lived to see that final feature reach theaters. On August 5, 1984, only weeks after filming, he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and died in Switzerland. When 1984 opened in Britain that October, audiences were watching a performance that had suddenly become permanent. The film was dedicated to him, a bleak story about memory, mortality, and erasure, now carrying the final screen presence of one of Britain's most recognizable actors. Perhaps that is why Burton's O'Brien still feels so unsettling. The performance never announces itself as a farewell. There is no grand final speech to the audience, only that famous voice controlling the room until the picture ends. His last movie closed on darkness. Hollywood's next goodbye would hide somewhere far brighter, behind laughter, comic timing, and a performer whose heart was becoming dangerously unreliable while the cameras kept rolling. Number 16. Peter Sellers. His final comedy hid a heart crisis. By 1980, Peter Sellers could still turn a raised eyebrow, an accent, or a perfectly delayed reaction into comedy. What the camera could not show was the condition of the heart behind those performances. He had survived severe cardiac episodes dating back to 1964, suffered another major heart attack in 1977, and afterward lived with a pacemaker. Yet instead of disappearing from the screen, Sellers kept working, carrying years of heart trouble into what would become the final stretch of his career. The irony became almost cinematic. After earning an Academy Award nomination for the restrained brilliance of being there, Sellers moved directly into the fiendish plot of Dr. Fu Manchu, playing multiple characters in a comedy centered on an ancient villain desperate to preserve his youth. Behind the disguises and absurdity stood a 54-year-old performer whose own health was increasingly fragile. In May 1980, only months before his death, another cardiac episode hospitalized him while he was in Dublin. There was still more planned. Sellers was developing another Inspector Clouseau project and had arranged to reunite with his old goon show partners in London. On July 22, however, he suffered a massive heart attack at the Dorchester Hotel. He was taken to Middlesex Hospital and died shortly after midnight on July 24. His final completed movie reached audiences after his death, turning what had been intended as another eccentric comedy into the last new performance audiences would ever receive from him. For Sellers, the laughter survived even when the body carrying it could not. His final chapter proved that a bright screen can conceal a frighteningly fragile reality just beyond the frame. But the next legend would leave Hollywood with something entirely different. An aging father, a quiet lakeside story, and one last performance powerful enough to win the prize he had waited an entire lifetime to hold. Number 15. Henry Fonda. His final Oscar role came at a cost. The lake looked peaceful, but Henry Fonda arrived at On Golden Pond, carrying a reality far heavier than the scenery suggested. At 76, the actor was living with serious heart disease, while Norman Thayer, the aging professor he played, was confronting failing memory, physical vulnerability, and the fear of time running out. Jane Fonda had helped bring the story to the screen, giving father and daughter their first feature film together. Their complicated real-life relationship added an intimacy no screenplay could manufacture. Nothing about Fonda's performance begged for sympathy. He made Norman sharp, stubborn, funny, and frightened in flashes so brief they could almost be missed. That restraint made the role more powerful. Beside Katharine Hepburn, he turned ordinary conversations about aging into something painfully recognizable. The unsettling part came afterward. Audiences were watching an actor portray a man measuring what remained of his life, while Fonda's own health was becoming increasingly fragile. The performance became his final theatrical film role, and delivered the honor Hollywood had never given him competitively. At the 1982 Academy Awards, Fonda won Best Actor, his first competitive Oscar, but his health was too poor for him to attend the ceremony. Jane accepted on his behalf. The victory arrived almost like a closing credit written by fate. After nearly half a century on screen, his last major character became the one that finally brought him the industry's highest acting prize. Henry Fonda died on August 12, 1982, only months after that victory. On Golden Pond remained his final feature film statement, quiet, intimate, and uncomfortably close to the realities surrounding him. He did not leave Hollywood with spectacle, he left it with restraint. Yet the next veteran actor would encounter an even stranger collision between fiction and life, performing a final scene about peacefully saying goodbye while privately facing his own rapidly closing chapter. Number 14. Edward G. Robinson. His final scene mirrored real life. In Soylent Green, Edward G. Robinson plays Saul Roth, an elderly man who remembers a world of clean air, real food, and open countryside. The performance feels tender from the beginning, but its darkest meaning existed beyond the script. Robinson was 79 and living with bladder cancer during production. Most people watching him work had no reason to imagine this would be his 101st and final film. Even as his health declined and severe hearing loss complicated filming, he continued delivering the quiet precision that had defined more than 4 decades on screen. Then came Saul's final journey. Inside a government facility, he chooses to spend his last moments surrounded by images of forests, oceans, animals, and fields, fragments of the earth his younger companion has never truly known. Charlton Heston's character watches through glass as Saul quietly fades from the story. The emotion lands differently once the truth is known. Robinson himself understood that his own time was limited while performing a scene built entirely around saying goodbye. Heston later wrote that the memory of filming it continued to haunt him. There was no theatrical farewell from Robinson after the cameras stopped. He simply completed the work. Filming ended in late 1972, and on January 26, 1973, Robinson died before Soylent Green reached theaters. Audiences who later discovered Saul's final scene were therefore watching something Hollywood could never deliberately recreate, an actor performing mortality with extraordinary restraint while privately standing frighteningly close to it himself. Robinson's final scene did not merely resemble a farewell. History transformed it into one. The gangster icon who once commanded the screen with explosive force left it almost whispering beneath images of a vanished world. But the next Hollywood legend concealed his final struggle differently. He completed one last thriller with the familiar strength audiences expected, while a terminal illness remained largely outside the picture, waiting for the public to learn what the camera never revealed. Number 13. Gary Cooper. His final film hit a terminal battle. Gary Cooper entered The Naked Edge with the kind of face audiences trusted instantly, and a medical reality almost no one outside his circle understood. Earlier in 1960, he had undergone operations connected to prostate and colon cancer. After recovering enough to travel, Cooper went to England and began filming the psychological thriller opposite Deborah Kerr. The story depended on one disturbing question. Could the famously honorable Gary Cooper actually be hiding something terrible behind that fictional suspicion? His own health was already demanding a price. Principal photography stretched from late September into December. Cooper pushed through the production and even sustained a back injury while filming a fight sequence. On screen, however, George Radcliffe remained controlled and unreadable, a businessman whose wife increasingly suspects he may be connected to murder. Cooper's naturally restrained style suddenly worked like camouflage. Every tired glance could belong to the character. Every pause could simply feel like suspense. Only after filming did the full darkness become clearer. By late December, Cooper's family learned that the cancer had spread and was considered inoperable. The public remained largely unaware until the following spring, when Jimmy Stewart accepted an honorary Academy Award for Cooper in April 1961. His emotional words suddenly told Hollywood what the star himself had kept remarkably private. Cooper died on May 13, 1961, at 60. The Naked Edge reached audiences after Cooper was gone, leaving one of Hollywood's strongest screen heroes preserved inside a mystery built on concealed truth. His final performance never asked viewers to see the illness behind it, and that may be what makes it linger. Yet another legendary leading man had already walked a similarly private road, finishing his own last performances while cancer remained hidden behind one of cinema's most recognizable faces. Number 12. Humphrey Bogart. He filmed through a hidden cancer battle. The cigarette, the battered expression, the voice that sounded carved from gravel. Humphrey Bogart still looked like the toughest man in the room when The Harder They Fall put him inside boxing's corrupt underworld. But the camera was recording something audiences could not yet understand. Bogart was chronically exhausted during production, and cancer was overtaking the actor behind Eddie Willis. Remarkably, the weariness suited the character, a disillusioned sports writer who has spent too long watching powerful men exploit fighters for money. Every shadow beneath Bogart's eyes seemed to belong naturally to the story. There was no attempt to turn weakness into spectacle. Bogart kept the performance lean and unsentimental, letting sarcasm and moral disgust carry the weight. After production, persistent symptoms could no longer be ignored. In March 1956, doctors operated on him for esophageal cancer. Treatment followed, but the disease had already become a far more serious opponent than anything written into his final screenplay. Hollywood knew Bogart as a man who rarely advertised vulnerability, and he approached his illness with much the same privacy. When The Harder They Fall reached theaters in May 1956, most moviegoers saw the Bogart they expected, controlled, cynical, unmistakably alive. Few understood how quickly his world was narrowing away from the spotlight. His condition worsened during the following months, and he made no further films. On January 14, 1957, Bogart died at his Los Angeles home at 57. The screen's ultimate hard-boiled survivor had completed his final picture without making his private struggle the performance. That may be the most powerful detail of all. Bogart never asked the audience to watch a sick man. He simply gave them Eddie Willis one final time and disappeared behind the character. But another Hollywood giant would soon face an even more precarious final production, working under severe physical limitations with an entire film effectively arranged around whether he had enough strength to reach the last scene. Number 11. Spencer Tracy. He finished his final film against the odds. By January 1967, Spencer Tracy's return to a movie set was anything but routine. His health had deteriorated enough that insurers would not cover him for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Rather than replace him, Katharine Hepburn and director Stanley Kramer put their own compensation at risk, while Tracy deferred his salary. The production quietly reshaped itself around him. Mornings became precious, shooting days were shortened, and every completed scene carried unusual weight. Yet, nothing about Matt Drayton feels fragile. Tracy gives him irritation humor, doubt, and finally absolute emotional clarity as the father forced to test his own principles when his daughter announces her interracial engagement. The climactic dinner speech required no theatrical excess. With Hepburn watching from across the room, Tracy spoke about enduring love with such intimacy that the scene seemed to reach beyond the characters themselves. It became the emotional center of his final performance. On May 26, Tracy finished the picture. He was reportedly proud simply to have reached the end. 15 days later, on June 10, 1967, he died after a heart attack at age 67. He never saw the completed film. When it opened that December, audiences encountered not merely his last role, but one of his most celebrated, earning him a 9th and final Best Actor Oscar nomination. Tracy's farewell was built around shortened mornings and carefully protected strength. The next legend would find no such gentle surroundings. His final production moved into punishing desert heat, demanded physical work with horses and ropes, and ended only days before his heart suddenly failed. The movie did not prove what caused what, but Hollywood would forever connect that brutal shoot with the last days of a king. Number 10. Clark Gable. The Misfits took a brutal toll. Nevada did not look like a movie set in the summer of 1960. It looked like an endurance test. While filming The Misfits, Clark Gable worked in desert temperatures reported near 120 degrees, surrounded by dust, horses, ropes, and repeated delays. At 59, he could have handed the demanding work to stuntmen. Instead, Gable insisted on performing much of it himself. In one grueling sequence, he was dragged across the desert while holding a rope connected to a moving truck. The man Hollywood had crowned the King was still determined to look indestructible. The horse-catching climax pushed that image even further. Friends had warned that Arthur Miller's modern Western might be too physically demanding, yet Gable wanted the role and believed the picture could become something special. Between takes, production problems stretched the schedule, while the Nevada locations offered little mercy. None of this proves the movie caused what followed. Gable also had significant cardiovascular risk factors. But the timing would permanently attach an ominous shadow to the film. Filming was completed in early November. Within days, Gable suffered a major heart attack. On November 16, 1960, he died before The Misfits ever reached theaters. He had already seen much of the footage and reportedly regarded the performance as among his finest. When audiences finally watched Gay Langland wrestling with wild horses and a vanishing way of life, they were unknowingly seeing Clark Gable's final completed performance. The Misfits preserved the King at full effort right to the edge, weathered stubborn, and still refusing the easy way out. The desert did not give Hollywood proof of what ended his life, but it gave cinema one unforgettable final image of him fighting to remain standing. The next farewell would be harder to disguise. Another former screen idol stepped before the camera for one last movie, and this time, the physical decline was becoming visible in every frame. Number 9. Errol Flynn. His final film revealed a star in decline. The shock of Cuban Rebel Girls is not what Errol Flynn does, it is what the camera quietly reveals. The swashbuckler who had once exploded across the screen in Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood was only 50, yet by 1959, years of declining health had visibly changed him. Shot cheaply in Cuba, the film placed Flynn on screen as himself, appearing intermittently while also providing narration. Gone was the polished Warner Brothers adventurer. In his place stood a noticeably older-looking star, whose legendary vitality seemed to be slipping beyond Hollywood's ability to disguise it. There was an uncomfortable honesty to those images. Flynn had recently shown flashes of renewed, dramatic strength in films such as The Sun Also Rises and The Roots of Heaven, suggesting that another chapter might still be possible. Instead, his final feature became a rough, semi-documentary production, far removed from the lavish adventures that had created his legend. Most haunting of all, the film ends with Flynn addressing the camera directly, an ordinary creative decision that history would soon transform into something resembling an accidental goodbye. Flynn never saw the movie reach American audiences. On October 14, 1959, while visiting Vancouver, he suffered a heart attack and died at 50. Cuban Rebel Girls opened in New York that December and entered wider release afterward, meaning audiences encountered his final screen appearance only after his life had already ended. The contrast was difficult to ignore. The man once marketed as Hollywood's embodiment of fearless youth had left behind a film in which time itself seemed impossible to conceal. Flynn's final movie captured decline simply by leaving the camera running. The next story would be far more abrupt. There would be no aging adventurer watching his legend fade, only one of Hollywood's brightest young stars suddenly becoming too ill to continue filming, leaving a major studio with an unfinished picture and a terrifying question: how could the movie possibly go on? Number 8. Jean Harlow. She fell ill before Saratoga was finished. Jean Harlow was only 26 when Saratoga began filming, yet she was already one of MGM's most valuable stars. Opposite Clark Gable, she was expected to deliver the same effortless sparkle audiences knew. Instead, something was going wrong. Near the end of production, Harlow became visibly unwell and collapsed while filming a scene with Walter Pidgeon. What first appeared to be another interruption on a busy studio schedule was actually the beginning of a crisis no reshoot could fix. Harlow went home to rest, but her condition worsened. She was eventually hospitalized, and on June 7, 1937, she died from kidney failure. The news stunned Hollywood. Saratoga was still unfinished, leaving MGM with a painful decision: abandon the picture, replace its star, or somehow complete what Harlow had already begun. The studio initially considered reshooting her material, but overwhelming interest in seeing her final performance changed the plan. The solution created one of old Hollywood's strangest cinematic illusions. Harlow's longtime stand-in, Mary Dees, completed missing shots often photographed from angles that concealed her face, while Paula Winslow supplied voice work where necessary. Editing stitched everything together around the footage Harlow had finished. When Saratoga opened on July 23, audiences were watching a movie whose leading actress had never been able to complete it, and the film became one of MGM's major successes that year. Harlow's final movie survived because Hollywood found a way to finish the frame after its star could no longer return to it. But the next production would face a different nightmare. On a distant war movie set, a rising actor would suddenly contract bacterial spinal meningitis, fall into a coma, and later say his heart briefly stopped, only to make an astonishing return to the very film he had nearly never finished. Number 7. Donald Sutherland. The illness that nearly ended everything. The tanks were roaring through Yugoslavia, Clint Eastwood was leading the mission, and Donald Sutherland was stealing scenes as the eccentric oddball in Kelly's Heroes. Then the comedy vanished off camera. During production, Sutherland contracted bacterial spinal meningitis and slipped into a coma. He later recalled that his condition became so critical that he briefly lost vital signs. What looked like a temporary illness had suddenly become a fight to survive. MGM moved quickly. Sutherland was flown to London and treated at Charing Cross Hospital for roughly 6 weeks. Recovery was not cinematic or instant. When he finally returned to the production, he described his mind as still badly shaken by what had happened. Yet, when the cameras rolled again, Oddball remained loose, funny, unpredictable, the complete opposite of the ordeal Sutherland had just survived. That return changed the meaning of the performance. Audiences saw a carefree tank commander talking about negative waves, never realizing the actor had recently been fighting something frighteningly real. Kelly's Heroes helped cement Sutherland as one of the film's unforgettable personalities. And the career that could have ended there instead continued for more than 5 decades. For Sutherland, the set became the place he nearly lost everything and then reclaimed his future. The next production offered no second return. Under the Spanish sun, another leading man stepped into a climactic sword fight, felt pain during the exhausting sequence, and walked away from the cameras not knowing he had just performed some of the final footage of his life. Number 6. Tyrone Power. He collapsed during a sword fight. Madrid, November 15, 1958. Tyrone Power stepped onto the set of Solomon and Sheba for another sword duel with longtime friend and co-star George Sanders. Power had built his legend on precisely this kind of physical elegance, from the Mark of Zorro to the Black Swan, but after repeated takes, something changed. He lowered his sword, complained of pain in his left arm, and could no longer continue. The 44-year-old star had suffered a massive heart attack during a scene that should have been routine for him. The production suddenly lost its King Solomon. Power died shortly afterward, with much of the expensive epic already photographed. The filmmakers faced an enormous problem. Their leading man was gone, yet the movie was nowhere near ready for release. Yul Brynner was brought in to replace him, forcing the production to reshoot Power's principal scenes. A few distant and rear-view shots reportedly survived in the completed picture, fleeting traces of the performance that would never be finished. The cruel irony was impossible to miss. One of Hollywood's greatest screen swordsmen had been performing a duel when his own body abruptly forced the cameras to stop. Solomon and Sheba eventually reached theaters in 1959, but the version audiences saw belonged largely to another actor. Power's true, final, completed feature remained witness for the prosecution, leaving his unfinished Solomon as one of classic Hollywood's most haunting cinematic fragments. Power's last set was shattered by a crisis no one had planned for. The next actor entered his final production knowing the danger was already there. While James Bond raced through Istanbul, one of 007's most memorable allies was quietly battling an incurable illness, determined to finish his scenes so his family would be financially secure. The schedule was compressed around him, and every completed take suddenly mattered. Number 5. Pedro Armendáriz. His final Bond role hid a terminal secret. Pedro Armendáriz arrived in From Russia with Love with exactly the presence a Bond ally needed. As Kerem Bey Istanbul's charismatic intelligence chief, he was warm, commanding, funny, and seemingly impossible to intimidate. But behind that confidence, Armendáriz was facing advanced cancer. Once the seriousness of his condition became clear, director Terence Young reorganized production so his material could be completed first. The polished performance concealed a race against time that audiences would never have guessed from the finished film. His commitment had a deeply practical reason. Armendáriz wanted to finish the role and secure the income for his family. The schedule was compressed into an intense stretch, and when his condition made certain shots impossible, Young reportedly doubled for him in some distant or over-the-shoulder material. Yet watch Kerem Bey joking with Bond, commanding his men, or moving through Istanbul, and almost none of that struggle reaches the screen. The character remains larger than life, even as the actor's strength was narrowing behind the camera. By May 1963, his principal work was finished. Armendáriz returned to the United States as his illness continued progressing, and he died on June 18, months before From Russia with Love premiered in London. When the movie finally reached audiences, Kerem Bey instantly became one of the early Bond series' most memorable allies. What viewers saw was not a visibly fading man, but a performer who had managed to preserve energy, humor, and authority inside every usable frame. Kerem Bey's strength on screen made the truth outside it almost invisible. That was Armendáriz's final illusion. The camera captured vitality, while time was running out behind it. Years later, another towering Hollywood veteran would walk into his last movie carrying his own history with cancer, only this time, the script itself would hand him an aging gunfighter confronting a terminal diagnosis. Fiction was about to move dangerously close to the man wearing the cowboy hat. Number 4. John Wayne, the Shootist, became his final chapter. Cancer entered the Shootist before John Wayne ever stepped into frame, but not in the way audiences might assume. 12 years earlier, surgeons had removed his cancerous left lung and several ribs. By the 1976 production, Wayne was considered cancer-free, yet the history gave J.B. Books an eerie authenticity. Books is an aging gunfighter, told he has terminal cancer, facing the one enemy his reputation cannot frighten. Wayne understood that territory more personally than almost anyone watching the film could have known. Wayne also refused to surrender the character to pure darkness. He pushed for profanity and some explicit cancer references to be softened, and he objected to a climactic moment that would have required Books to shoot an opponent in the back. Even at the end of his career, Wayne was protecting the moral code attached to his screen image. Production was not effortless either. Filming had to pause for about a week when he became incapacitated by influenza. Released in August 1976, The Shootist became something nobody had officially planned John Wayne's final movie. He intended to keep working afterward, but further film projects never materialized. 3 years later, after being diagnosed with stomach cancer, Wayne died on June 11, 1979. That timing permanently changed the movie. The scene in which James Stewart's doctor calmly explains Books' diagnosis now feels almost unbearably close to reality, even though Wayne was not terminally ill while filming it. For Wayne, fiction only became prophetic in hindsight. His last cowboy rode into the sunset before anyone knew it was truly the end. The next legend would receive a warning much sooner. Young, astonishingly fit, and filming the project meant to conquer Hollywood, he suddenly collapsed months before release, a frightening signal that something inside one of cinema's most powerful bodies was already going dangerously wrong. Number 3. Bruce Lee, his final film came with a chilling warning. May 10, 1973. Enter the Dragon had finished principal photography, but Bruce Lee was back at Golden Harvest recording dialogue in a hot Hong Kong studio. With cooling equipment reportedly switched off to protect the soundtrack, Lee suddenly collapsed. He recovered briefly, then went down again and suffered convulsions. Doctors rushed him to the hospital where cerebral edema, dangerous swelling of the brain, was treated. The 32-year-old martial arts phenomenon survived, but the episode now reads like an eerie warning. Lee recovered quickly enough to continue planning his future. Medical examinations in Los Angeles reportedly found no obvious lasting abnormality, and he returned to Hong Kong expecting to promote Enter the Dragon and resume work on Game of Death. Nothing about his public image suggested retreat. He was lean, explosive, internationally famous, and standing on the edge of the breakthrough he had spent years fighting to achieve. 10 weeks after that collapse, on July 20, Lee complained of a headache while discussing Game of Death. After taking the prescription painkiller Equagesic, he lay down and could not be revived. He died before Enter the Dragon reached theaters. A coroner's inquest attributed his death to cerebral edema associated with a hypersensitive reaction to an ingredient in the medication, although alternative medical explanations have continued to be debated. Enter the Dragon became the global explosion Lee never lived to witness, making that May collapse one of the most unsettling moments surrounding his final completed film. The warning came from inside his own body. But Hollywood had already seen another kind of danger, one created by the movie set itself. Decades earlier, a performer painted silver for a beloved fantasy began struggling for air as metallic powder reached his lungs, forcing the studio to replace him before audiences ever saw his Tin Man. Number 2. Buddy Ebsen the Tin Man makeup nearly cost him his life. Before the Tin Man ever followed the yellow brick road, The Wizard of Oz nearly sent its first metal man to the hospital for good. Buddy Ebsen had originally been cast as the Scarecrow, before switching roles with Ray Bolger. To create his silver appearance, MGM makeup artists covered Ebsen with aluminum powder. After days of rehearsals and filming, he developed severe body aches, cramps, and increasingly serious breathing problems. The fantasy on camera had created a very real medical emergency behind it. Ebsen was eventually hospitalized, reportedly requiring treatment under an oxygen tent after inhaling the metallic dust. His recovery took weeks, but Hollywood did not wait. Jack Haley was brought in as the new Tin Man, and the makeup formula was changed from loose aluminum powder to a paste. Every filmed scene featuring Ebsen was replaced, erasing his physical performance from the movie that would become one of cinema's most recognizable classics. Yet Ebsen was never completely erased. Portions of his recorded singing remained buried in the finished soundtrack, creating a strange cinematic ghost audiences could hear traces of the Tin Man they were never allowed to see. More importantly, he survived the ordeal and built a long career afterward, eventually becoming famous to another generation through television. What could have ended everything instead became one extraordinary, largely invisible scar from Hollywood's golden age. The Tin Man disaster proved that even movie magic could become dangerous when the technology behind it went wrong. But the next production would dwarf Oz in scale, expense, and chaos. During one of Hollywood's most notorious epics, its million-dollar leading lady would develop severe pneumonia, require an emergency tracheotomy, and leave an entire studio wondering whether its colossal spectacle and its star would survive long enough for the cameras to roll again. Number 1. Elizabeth Taylor. She nearly died making Cleopatra. The most expensive spectacle Hollywood had ever attempted nearly lost its queen before the real epic even began. Cleopatra started filming in England in 1960, where cold, damp weather repeatedly disrupted Elizabeth Taylor's health. Production stalled, sets stood unused, and millions of dollars were already disappearing. Then, in March 1961, Taylor developed severe pneumonia. Her condition became critical enough that doctors performed an emergency tracheotomy to help her breathe. Suddenly, the crisis surrounding Cleopatra was no longer about budgets or schedules. It was about whether its 29-year-old star would recover. She did. After months of recovery, Taylor returned with the tracheotomy scar still visible, a physical reminder of how close the production had come to losing far more than money. The original English footage was abandoned, the movie relocated to Italy, and much of the project effectively started again. New sets rose, scripts continued changing, and Joseph L. Mankiewicz took control of a production already famous for chaos. What followed became Hollywood mythology. Taylor transformed into Cleopatra beneath enormous costumes and elaborate sets, while the production expanded into one of the costliest films ever made at the time. Her recovery also allowed her to attend the 1961 Academy Awards, where she accepted Best Actress for Butterfield 8, with the tracheotomy scar clearly visible. The woman newspapers had recently described as critically ill was standing beneath Hollywood's brightest lights, holding an Oscar. When Cleopatra finally reached theaters in 1963, audiences saw towering palaces, armies, costumes, and one of cinema's most famous stars commanding every frame. They could not see the hospital room that had nearly ended it all. Taylor survived the production, completed the film, and continued working for decades. Cleopatra became infamous for excess, but behind all those millions, the most extraordinary thing the production preserved was Elizabeth Taylor herself. Looking back at these stories, what matters is not only what happened to the stars, but how the film industry responded to health, safety, and the pressure to keep production moving. Many of these cases show how a finished movie can conceal physical limitations, workplace risks, and difficult decisions made beyond the camera. Understanding that context gives us a more informed view of Hollywood history, one that respects artistic achievement while also recognizing that no scene schedule or financial investment should ever outweigh the health and safety of the people responsible for bringing a film to life. And maybe that is what makes these disturbing tragedies worth remembering. Not simply how they ended, but what they reveal about the hidden cost behind Hollywood history. If these final performances, on-set disasters, hidden illnesses, and behind-the-scenes stories change the way you see these films, tell us which story stayed with you most. And if you missed any of our previous journeys into Hollywood's darker past, there are more waiting for you here on Hollywood Stars and Scars. Like the video, subscribe, and stay close for the stories still ahead. Until next time, take care of yourself, have a wonderful day, and remember, every old movie may still be hiding one more story beyond the frame. Fame builds the illusion of safety, then one ordinary second erases it. Hollywood Stars and Scars cracks open the sealed files on the Hollywood scandals the industry preferred to erase. Freak accidents that claimed legends in ways no scriptwriter would invent. A discarded match, an ungrounded guitar, a silk scarf in the wind. The pattern stays the same, brilliance meeting pure chance. By the time this investigation reaches one chaotic night on a film set, the only question left is how little protection the brightest stars ever really had.
Behind the glitter, the scars remain. Welcome to Hollywood Stars and Scars.
Number 20. Carole Lombard, the doomed war bond flight of a Hollywood queen. In the glamorous zenith of the 1930s, Carole Lombard reigned supreme as the undisputed queen of comedy, a luminous force of nature whose razor-sharp wit and breathtaking elegance commanded the silver screen. She was the ultimate Hollywood royalty, dripping in diamonds and draped in bias-cut silk, forming one half of the industry's most powerful golden couple, alongside her deeply devoted husband, Clark Gable. Paparazzi endlessly chased their picture-perfect romance, while studios banked millions on her undeniable box office magnetism and flawless public persona. Yet this glittering empire shattered in the freezing darkness of January 1942, during a patriotic cross-country war bond tour that was meant to solidify her legacy as an invincible American hero. Boarding TWA Flight 3, a grueling journey back to Los Angeles, turned into an unprecedented nightmare when a catastrophic navigational error sent the aircraft miles off its designated flight path. Blinded by the ink-black night, the pilots unknowingly steered the commercial airliner directly toward the jagged, unforgiving cliffs of Mount Potosi. The violent impact obliterated the aircraft upon collision, instantly extinguishing the lives of all 22 passengers aboard and sending an irreversible shockwave of absolute grief across the globe. Studio executives were paralyzed by the sudden loss, while Gable was left a broken man, famously searching the scorched mountainside in vain before retreating into devastating isolation. The industry watched in stunned silence as a towering cinematic goddess was abruptly reduced to ashes, her brilliant future erased by a singular, senseless miscalculation in the dark. Hollywood can easily manufacture the perfect illusion of invincibility, but the unforgiving sky holds no reverence for a marquee name. Number 19. Harry Houdini, the unexpected backstage punch that ended a legend. In the roaring peak of the 1920s, Harry Houdini stood as the unbreakable force of live spectacle. Crowds filled theaters across continents to watch the man who seemed to own death itself. He emerged from sealed underwater chambers, wriggled free of suspended straitjackets, and climbed out of graves the world believed would hold him forever. The branding was absolute. Absolute physical control, iron endurance, and an image of invincibility that no rival could touch. For a generation, he was less performer than living legend, the one figure who had rewritten the rules of survival on stage. That carefully constructed invulnerability met its quiet fracture in a Montreal dressing room in October 1926. Already nursing a broken ankle from an earlier performance, Houdini was reclining when a university student challenged his claim that no blow to the abdomen could hurt him. Multiple unexpected punches landed before the escape artist could brace. Pain followed. Fever rose. Yet the show continued. Reports later confirmed he ignored mounting symptoms, completed a final Detroit engagement with a dangerously high temperature, and only then sought hospital care. Surgeons discovered a ruptured appendix and spreading peritonitis, an infection that, in the years before antibiotics, offered almost no survival path. Houdini lingered for several days before dying on Halloween, October 31st, 1926, at age 52. The official record listed the medical cause clearly. The public legend preferred the more dramatic punch. Either way, the man who had escaped every restraint the world could invent could not escape the ordinary limits of the human body. In the end, the greatest illusion of all may have been the belief that fame itself could keep death waiting. Number 18. Olive Thomas, the fatal midnight mistake with a toxic potion. Before the Roaring Twenties fully caught fire, Olive Thomas was its original incandescent spark. She was the undisputed darling of the Ziegfeld Follies, and a silent film sensation whose ethereal beauty defined an entire generation of glamour. Married to Jack Pickford, the brother of industry titan Mary Pickford, Olive anchored Hollywood's first true royal couple, parading through endless champagne-soaked galas and flashing camera bulbs. The studios fiercely protected her flawless, angelic branding, selling audiences a pristine fantasy of young love and limitless wealth. That carefully constructed fantasy dissolved during a lavish second honeymoon vacation to Paris in the fall of 1920. After a long night of elite partying, an exhausted and intoxicated Olive stumbled into the pitch-black bathroom of the Hotel Ritz. Searching blindly for a sleep aid or a glass of water to quiet her nerves, her hands found a bottle containing mercury bichloride, a highly toxic, corrosive solution prescribed to treat her husband's heavily guarded, scandalous medical condition. In the unforgiving darkness, she unknowingly ingested the lethal chemical, triggering a catastrophic internal crisis. The aftermath was a desperate, agonizing scramble as she clung to life in a Parisian hospital, while studio fixers frantically tried to control the explosive narrative. Rumors of suicide rampant, infidelity, and wild cover-ups dominated the tabloid headlines, forever tainting the Pickford dynasty's immaculate empire. She passed away just days later, her meteoric reign extinguished at only 25 years old. The camera can immortalize a flawless face, but it cannot illuminate the deadly secrets hiding in a pitch-black hotel room. Number 17. John Eric Hexum, the senseless blank cartridge prop gun tragedy. By the mid-1980s, John Eric Hexum was positioned as the industry's ultimate golden boy. With a chiseled jawline and undeniably magnetic charm, the 26-year-old actor was fast-tracked for superstardom. Headlining the primetime action series Cover Up, he became a fixture in glossy magazines and heavy network promotional campaigns, embodying the flawless leading man archetype that studio executives fiercely cultivated. He was the absolute picture of television invincibility, carrying a career trajectory that seemed entirely bulletproof. That carefully cultivated illusion shattered during a grueling delayed filming schedule on a 20th Century Fox soundstage. Frustrated by an endless production holdup, a restless Hexum picked up a .44 Magnum prop revolver loaded with functional blank cartridges used for dramatic camera angles. Unaware of the devastating physics behind the theatrical weapon, he playfully raised the steel barrel to his right temple and pulled the trigger. There was no actual projectile, but the explosive, concussive force of the ignited wadding launched at point-blank range was powerful enough to drive bone fragments deep into his brain. The set erupted into sheer panic as the beloved star collapsed. Despite a frantic rush to emergency surgery, the catastrophic trauma was completely irreversible, leading to him being quietly declared brain dead days later in a highly secure hospital wing. His senseless passing forced an immediate industry-wide reckoning regarding on-set munitions, abruptly dismantling the careless culture of cinematic weaponry. A prop designed to manufacture a purely fictional threat proved that, in Hollywood, even an empty barrel can deliver a fatal reality check. Number 16, Jane Mansfield, the horrific underride crash that changed highway laws. In the late 1950s, Jane Mansfield was the ultimate architectural triumph of studio marketing, a platinum blonde bombshell whose hyper-glamorized curves and breathless persona dominated global box offices. She was the reigning queen of publicity stunts, a shrewd businesswoman masked behind a whispery voice and an endless sea of pink velvet, leopard print, and blinding paparazzi flashes. Hollywood crafted her as an unstoppable force of sensuality, ensuring her name was permanently etched into the neon-lit marquees of international pop culture. That vibrant, larger-than-life empire came to a sudden, devastating halt on a desolate Louisiana highway in the suffocatingly early hours of a June morning in 1967. Traveling to a television appearance, her vehicle became engulfed in a blinding wall of thick fog, rolling off a nearby mosquito-spraying truck. With zero visibility, the driver failed to spot the slowed tractor-trailer looming ahead in the darkness, resulting in a horrific underride collision where her car was forced entirely beneath the immense steel rear of the truck. The sheer velocity of the crash sheared the roof from the vehicle, resulting in an instantaneous and catastrophic loss of life for the 34-year-old icon and the adults beside her. The profound shock of an international sex symbol perishing in such a brutal mechanical disaster forced the federal government into immediate action. Authorities mandated that all commercial freight trailers be equipped with heavy steel rear guards, a life-saving safety mechanism still universally known today as the Mansfield bar. The brightest flashbulbs in the world could not penetrate the heavy fog of a lonely midnight highway. Number 15. Vic Morrow, the unthinkable on-set helicopter disaster. For decades, Vic Morrow anchored the television landscape as a quintessential hardened anti-hero. Rising to phenomenal prominence on the hit series Combat, his weathered gravitas made him a highly respected industry veteran. Hollywood revered his ability to project raw masculinity, and by the early 1980s, the seasoned actor was perfectly positioned for a massive cinematic resurgence. Cast in the heavily anticipated Twilight Zone feature, Morrow was preparing to deliver a defining comeback performance, stepping back into the glowing center of the Hollywood spotlight. That triumphant return was completely obliterated under the artificial night sky of a California filming location in July 1982. During an elaborate sequence requiring reckless pyrotechnic blasts, a low-flying helicopter hovered dangerously close to the action. Overwhelmed by the intense heat and blinding debris of the simulated explosions, the pilot lost complete control of the aircraft. As cameras rolled, the massive machine plummeted directly into the shallow river below, instantly striking Morrow and two illegally hired child actors he was carrying through the water. The catastrophic incident resulted in the immediate, devastating loss of all three lives, leaving a production crew paralyzed by unprecedented trauma. The shocking aftermath ripped the veil off egregious directorial negligence, triggering a bitter, years-long criminal trial that dragged elite studio figures into the courtroom. Although executives ultimately evaded prison, this staggering tragedy forced a sweeping overhaul of cinematic safety protocols nationwide. The relentless pursuit of a blockbuster shot demanded the ultimate price, proving that Hollywood's most terrifying monsters often sit safely behind the camera. Number 14. Boris Sagal, a fatal step into the spinning blades. Boris Sagal possessed a masterful command over Hollywood's most gripping narratives, reigning as an elite director whose visionary eye shaped the modern entertainment landscape. He was the unshakable architect behind high-stakes suspense, orchestrating cinematic tension for massive productions like the cult thriller The Omega Man. Studios relied heavily on his iron grip over complex sets, viewing him as a bulletproof creator who effortlessly manufactured artificial danger for millions. From the director's chair, he projected absolute authority, building an impeccable legacy steeped in breathless action and perfectly controlled chaos. That commanding presence evaporated instantly during a frantic location shoot for the ambitious miniseries World War III. Arriving at a windswept lot in Oregon, the seasoned director hastily disembarked from a helicopter, while the deafening machine remained fully operational. Surrounded by the roaring engine and experiencing a fleeting lapse in situational awareness, he turned in the wrong direction. He unwittingly stepped directly into the invisible, high-velocity rotation of the aircraft's tail rotor, triggering a catastrophic strike that brought production to a horrifying standstill. The devastating collision inflicted catastrophic physical trauma, extinguishing his life hours later in an intensive care ward. A profoundly traumatized crew was left reeling, while the broader industry was forced into a sudden reckoning over the glaring lack of aviation safety protocols on active sets. His towering artistic contributions became permanently tethered to a senseless misstep that exposed the lethal hazards lurking outside the camera's frame. The man who dedicated his life to directing perfectly calculated suspense ultimately fell victim to a violent, completely unscripted reality. Number 13. William Holden, the tragic Hollywood legend undiscovered for days. William Holden embodied the absolute pinnacle of classic cinematic masculinity, a ruggedly handsome leading man whose magnetic gravitas anchored monumental masterpieces like Sunset Boulevard and The Bridge on the River Kwai. He was undeniable Hollywood royalty, commanding staggering box office returns while projecting an effortless, stoic strength that effortlessly captivated global audiences. The studio machinery meticulously polished his flawless public persona, eagerly presenting a triumphant golden boy hero who always emerged victorious against impossible cinematic odds. Beneath that invincible veneer, however, a destructive cycle of severe isolation and relentless decades-long alcohol dependency was quietly dismantling his private reality behind closed doors. Secluded within his luxurious California coastal apartment, the deeply troubled actor tripped over a minor rug in his bedroom, crashing heavily into the brutally sharp edge of a wooden bedside table. The sudden blunt force trauma resulted in a catastrophic physical injury, leaving him fully conscious but rapidly declining in a sprawling, opulent home that suddenly functioned as an inescapable tomb. Despite desperate, agonizing attempts to manage the crisis with nearby tissues, his remaining strength faded completely as he succumbed to the severe trauma, alone in the suffocating dark. For 4 devastating days, one of the most famously recognizable faces on the entire planet lay undiscovered on his floor. His tragic absence completely unnoticed by the glittering industry he had spent his life helping to build. All the wealth and adoration in the world could not summon a single savior when the final curtain dropped in total silence. Number 12. Victor Sen-Young, the silent home hazard that took a TV icon. Victor Sen-Young effortlessly captured the hearts of millions, cementing his legacy as a deeply beloved fixture on the television powerhouse Bonanza. He represented a comforting warmth in American living rooms, successfully navigating a fiercely competitive industry that rarely offered actors such enduring, high-profile stability. The studio machinery relied heavily on his unmistakable on-screen charisma, ensuring his face remained a permanent staple in weekly broadcast schedules. His flawless branding as a dependable presence shielded him from the cutthroat tabloid viciousness that so frequently destroyed his peers. Retreating from the blinding glare of demanding production, the veteran performer sought peaceful solitude by dedicating his private hours to the meticulous craft of traditional pottery. Inside his North Hollywood sanctuary, a severely malfunctioning clay kiln silently initiated a deadly sequence of events, completely hidden from view. Without triggering an alarm, a continuous leak of odorless natural gas slowly saturated the enclosed air of his residence. The suffocating fumes systematically replaced the oxygen, transforming a tranquil, creative workspace into an inescapable, invisible trap. Authorities eventually discovered the acclaimed veteran lifeless among his handcrafted ceramics, confirming he passed away without recognizing the lethal danger. The profoundly devastating quietness of his demise jarred a grieving public, sharply contrasting the loud drama of the entertainment machine he served. His solitary exit left the industry deeply unsettled, proving that a celebrated legacy built under the brightest studio spotlights offers no immunity against everyday vulnerabilities. A beloved household name was ultimately erased, not by a spectacular scandal, but by a silent hazard lurking behind a locked door. Number 11. Steve Peregrine took the bizarre cherry choking accident. Steve Peregrine took personified the chaotic, glittering rebellion of the British underground music scene. As the eccentric founding half of Tyrannosaurus Rex, he projected an intoxicating aura of bohemian invincibility that enchanted a fiercely loyal counterculture following. The industry marketed him as an untamable visionary, wrapping his persona in a hypnotic haze of velvet fashion and blinding concert lights. He routinely survived the notoriously destructive excesses of chaotic rock and roll touring schedules, seemingly immune to the dangers that swallowed his peers. That seemingly impenetrable armor of rock star resilience was completely dismantled during a startlingly mundane social gathering. Far away from roaring stadiums and flashing paparazzi bulbs, the celebrated percussionist consumed an ordinary cocktail cherry while relaxing in a quiet, secluded private residence. Without warning, the tiny piece of fruit became catastrophically lodged deep within his airway, immediately initiating a silent, desperate fight for oxygen. There were no speeding vehicles or scandalous industry betrayals to blame for the sudden crisis rapidly unfolding. Emergency interventions entirely failed to dislodge the obstruction, leading to the devastating collapse of an influential artistic pioneer at just 31 years old. The music press was left utterly stunned, scrambling to report how a man who fearlessly navigated the wildest extremes of the entertainment business was defeated by a harmless garnish. Bereaved fans mourned the senseless loss of a creative giant whose brilliant trajectory was abruptly cut short by a freakish anatomical anomaly. The wildest legends of rock and roll survival can be effortlessly undone by the most innocent hazards of ordinary daily life. The camera lens excels at manufacturing gods building monuments of flesh and light that appear entirely immune to consequence. Yet, archival accident logs reveal a profoundly leveling truth. Catastrophe rarely requires a spectacular villain or a cinematic climax. It thrives in the mundane blind spots of human routine. A silent valve, a misplaced step, or a theatrical prop assumed to be harmless. When the illusion of invincibility overtakes fundamental situational awareness, innocent environments rapidly transform into invisible traps. True preservation demands a grounded respect for our own physical vulnerability, stripping away the dangerous myth of absolute control. But even within the supposed sanctuary of a locked home, tragedy only needs a single careless spark to strike. Number 10. Charles McGraw, the fatal shower glass mishap. Charles McGraw anchored the bleak, rain-slicked alleys of cinematic noir with a gravel-throated intensity that studios simply could not manufacture. He was the quintessential screen enforcer, a formidable presence whose deeply lined face and uncompromising physical authority commanded classics like The Narrow Margin. Directors relied on his brooding masculinity to ground their darkest thrillers, projecting a rugged, unbreakable permanence across the silver screen. The industry packaged him as a tough guy titan, an immovable force, seemingly carved out of concrete, who effortlessly dominated a shadowy world of scripted danger. The formidable veteran met a shockingly fragile reality inside the secluded privacy of his Studio City residence. Slipping unexpectedly while bathing, the actor violently crashed through a standard shower door that shattered instantly under his heavy weight. There were no stunt coordinators or padded mats to soften the impact, only a disastrous collision with fragile, untempered glass. The sudden domestic catastrophe inflicted catastrophic lacerations, turning a mundane daily routine into an irreversible, desperate medical crisis, completely hidden from the outside world. Emergency personnel arrived to find the once unbreakable legend irreparably wounded, ultimately confirming his devastating passing long before the tabloids could leak the story. A deeply stunned Hollywood establishment struggled to process how a man who survived countless theatrical shootouts and brutal on-screen brawls could be so effortlessly defeated by common household architecture. His abrupt demise stripped away the invincible armor meticulously crafted by decades of heavy studio marketing. The silver screen promises its titans eternal resilience, but ultimate vulnerability is often waiting quietly behind a fragile pane of glass. Number 9. Claude Francois, the deadly bathtub electrocution of a superstar. Claude Francois generated a relentless frenzy across the European music landscape. A charismatic performer whose polished persona dictated international pop trends. He was a monumental triumph of the recording industry. A glittering idol wrapped in sequined suits who mobilized armies of obsessive fans. Behind the manicured charm lay a calculating visionary. The genius who originally composed the timeless melody of My Way. The marketing machinery shielded his intense perfectionism, eagerly selling audiences an immaculate, high-voltage fantasy of a perpetually triumphant, untouchable musical god. The compulsion that built his empire ultimately orchestrated its abrupt collapse, inside the humid confines of a Parisian bathroom. Soaking in his luxurious tub, the meticulous singer noticed a misaligned wall sconce, hanging precariously above the water. Driven by an obsessive need to correct the minor aesthetic flaw, he reached out with soaking wet hands to straighten the faulty fixture. A devastating surge of raw electrical current instantly bypassed the opulent decor, unexpectedly transforming his private sanctuary into a lethal trap that permanently silenced a legendary voice. Paramedics rushed into the lavish Parisian apartment to find the reigning pop sovereign irreparably stricken, declaring him deceased at just 39. The staggering announcement plunged millions into hysterical mourning, freezing his immaculate image forever in suspended youth. A sprawling media empire was completely paralyzed, forced to report that a superstar who micromanaged every detail of his spectacular productions was suddenly undone by a mundane household chore. The brightest stage lights can easily blind an immortal icon to the quiet, lethal hazards waiting in the dark. Number 8. Jack Cassidy, the careless mistake that sparked a deadly inferno. Jack Cassidy possessed a razor-sharp theatrical magnetism that effortlessly dominated elite Broadway stages and primetime television screens. He was the ultimate polished aristocrat, a charismatic performer whose silver-haired sophistication made him a highly sought-after antagonist in glossy detective dramas. The studio machinery capitalized on his immaculate charm, masking a turbulent personal reality beneath a thick veneer of tailored suits and blinding marquee lights. He commanded profound industry respect, projecting an aura of untouchable prestige that reliably captivated devoted audiences nationwide. An ordinary evening, isolated inside his sprawling West Hollywood penthouse, unexpectedly triggered a catastrophic sequence of lethal events. Unwinding in complete solitude, the celebrated star neglected to properly extinguish a lit cigarette before drifting into a heavy slumber. Smoldering embers silently ignited the surrounding upholstery, rapidly transforming a meticulously decorated, opulent space into an inescapable inferno. There were no flashing paparazzi bulbs or adoring crowds to witness the ensuing chaos, only an aggressively spreading blaze that viciously consumed his secluded sanctuary. Emergency responders eventually breached the devastated high-rise, recovering the unrecognizable remains of the acclaimed actor amidst the scorched ruins of his home. Dental records were officially required to confirm the tragic loss, abruptly shattering the flawless image he had spent a lifetime constructing. The entertainment capital was left unsettled by the grim realization that a figure of such immense theatrical power could be erased by a single momentary lapse in basic judgment. The brightest Hollywood spotlights offer absolute zero protection against a silent spark carelessly left in the dark. Number 7. Keith Relf, the lethal guitar shock that ended a rock pioneer. Keith Relf spearheaded the British blues rock invasion as the mesmerizing frontman of the Yardbirds, carving out a deeply influential sound that forever altered the musical landscape. He was an undeniable architect of heavy rock, a visionary vocalist, sharing the spotlight with legendary guitar prodigies while maintaining absolute command over ravenous crowds. Executives fiercely capitalized on his brooding rock star mystique, marketing an untouchable pioneer who effortlessly navigated the chaotic excess of the swinging 60s. His revolutionary experiments cemented a towering legacy, projecting an aura of artistic invincibility, destined to endure. That trailblazing momentum evaporated within the unglamorous confines of his own suburban basement. Retreating from the grinding demands of touring to focus on private composition, the acclaimed musician picked up an improperly grounded electric guitar inside a poorly wired home recording space. Free from the protective oversight of professional sound engineers, he unknowingly stood on a damp floor while handling the faulty vintage equipment. A devastating electrical charge surged violently through the steel strings into his body, instantly transforming a familiar creative sanctuary into an inescapable hazard. Relatives grappled with a preventable domestic catastrophe that permanently silenced a defining voice of an era. The 33-year-old icon was discovered lifeless by his young son, a traumatic reality that instantly stripped away the glittering veneer of his rock and roll mythology. The music industry was forced to report that a pioneer who survived the notoriously dangerous extremes of fame was ultimately defeated by a careless wiring flaw. The loudest amplification of artistic genius offers no protection against the quietest, most invisible of everyday currents. Number 6. Mark Frechette, the tragic prison weightlifting disaster. Mark Frechette skyrocketed to global prominence as the brooding face of Michelangelo Antonioni's masterpiece, Zabriskie Point. He was an overnight cinematic sensation, a striking carpenter plucked from obscurity who suddenly navigated elite film festivals and glaring paparazzi crossfires. Executives attempted to mold his raw defiance into a profitable leading man archetype, eagerly selling audiences the ultimate fantasy of rebellious youth. The media immortalized his captivating gaze, projecting an aura of untouchable radical chic that perfectly embodied the shifting energy of the Hollywood landscape. That cultivated on-screen rebellion mutated into a devastating catastrophe when profound disillusionment with the entertainment machinery pushed him toward radicalized extremism. Abandoning the glittering privileges of stardom, the actor participated in an armed bank robbery that triggered a fatal shootout for his accomplice and severe legal consequences. The glittering marquise immediately went dark as the justice system erased his leading man status, replacing tailored premier suits with institutional uniforms. A highly publicized court file transformed a celebrated icon into an inmate, completely shattering the illusion of cinematic immunity. The crushing reality of his monumental fall finalized its toll during a solitary recreation period within the bleak concrete walls of a state penitentiary. Confined to a heavily monitored exercise yard, the 32-year-old former star attempted to lift a massive iron barbell, which unexpectedly slipped and pinned his neck with suffocating force. Guards later discovered him lifeless beneath the heavy plates. A jarring demise officially ruled a bizarre recreational accident. The silver screen expertly crafts the illusion of boundless rebellion, but real-world gravity operates without a safety net. Number 5. Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Richardson, the tragic flight that wiped out 3 legends. Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Richardson represented the unstoppable vanguard of early rock and roll, an explosive triad of talent rewriting the rules of the American airwaves. They were the undisputed architects of a frantic new sound, mobilizing teenagers while executives aggressively packaged their energy into sold-out tours. The recording industry banked on their undeniable charisma, projecting a high-octane fantasy of youthful invincibility that dominated global charts. Their names were illuminated in neon, standing as bulletproof icons representing a cultural revolution that felt immune to tragedy. The grueling reality of cross-country touring abruptly shattered that golden illusion on a freezing Midwestern runway. Exhausted by broken heating systems on dilapidated buses, the musicians hastily chartered a small, single-engine aircraft to reach their next, heavily promoted engagement. A catastrophic combination of severe winter weather and an unqualified pilot created an inescapable hazard above the desolate farmland. Plunging into blinding snow, the plane suffered a devastating impact against the frozen earth. instantly erasing 3 monumental careers in a horrific tangle of shattered metal.
Law enforcement recovered the wreckage miles from any roaring concert venue, delivering a shockwave that paralyzed the entertainment landscape. Grieving widows were left reeling, while record labels frantically scrambled to repackage unfinished tracks, forcing a stunned generation to accept the mortality of their musical idols. The crash permanently altered the trajectory of modern broadcasting, forcing the establishment to confront the lethal logistics hidden behind endless promotional tours. The brightest cultural revolutions can be extinguished in seconds by the unforgiving cold of an empty winter sky. Number 4. Buddy Clark, the routine flight that turned into a nightmare. Buddy Clark commanded the golden age of American broadcasting with a velvet baritone that seamlessly defined the post-war musical landscape. He was the quintessential radio monarch, a sophisticated crooner whose effortless vocal elegance heavily influenced millions tuning in from coast to coast. Record executives aggressively packaged his suave, tuxedo-clad persona, transforming him into a phenomenally profitable chart topper, capable of charming an entire nation. The media eagerly immortalized his flawless public branding, projecting an immaculate aura of romantic invincibility that felt permanently embedded in the Hollywood establishment. A routine weekend excursion swiftly dismantled that carefully constructed empire high above the sprawling California terrain. Returning to the entertainment capital following a collegiate sporting event, the celebrated vocalist boarded a chartered Cessna, aiming for a brief, unremarkable flight home. Misjudging atmospheric conditions and critical fuel reserves, the pilot completely lost control over a densely populated urban corridor. The lightweight aircraft violently plunged onto a bustling Los Angeles boulevard, instantly transforming a mundane afternoon commute into a catastrophic scene of shattered fuselage and blinding chaos. First responders rushed into the hazardous wreckage, extracting the gravely wounded icon from the twisted steel of the completely decimated cabin. Despite frantic surgical interventions at a nearby emergency ward, the beloved performer succumbed to massive internal trauma just hours after the catastrophic impact. The sudden broadcasting blackout left devoted fans reeling, abruptly ending a towering career built on flawless timing and perfect pitch. A soaring legacy of vocal perfection was permanently silenced by a fatal miscalculation in the smog-choked California sky. Number 3. Isadora Duncan, the shocking open-car scarf disaster. Isadora Duncan masterfully redefined physical expression, captivating elite European audiences as the undisputed mother of modern dance. She was a mesmerizing force of artistic rebellion, discarding rigid theatrical constraints for flowing silk and barefoot movement. The press obsessively documented her bohemian extravagance, transforming her independent lifestyle into a profitable brand of romantic defiance. Promoters aggressively sold a vision of absolute liberation, packaging a revolutionary icon whose every dramatic gesture transcended mundane human limits. That curated aura of untouchable grace became her sudden undoing along the windswept promenades of the French Riviera. Sliding into an open-air sports car, the celebrated performer draped a heavy, hand-painted silk scarf around her neck, allowing the opulent fabric to trail dramatically behind her. As the powerful vehicle surged forward, the silk plummeted fiercely, entangling within the rapidly spinning spokes of the rear tire. In a devastating display of uncompromising physics, the luxurious garment instantly tightened, functioning as an unbreakable tether that brought the machine to a horrific halt. First responders quickly encountered a deeply unsettling scene, devoid of theatrical majesty, discovering the towering cultural pioneer entirely immobilized by her own signature accessory. The catastrophic mechanical force inflicted instantaneous, irreversible trauma, permanently silencing a visionary who spent decades dictating her extraordinary narrative. Global headlines seized on the grim irony, reporting that a legend renowned for absolute physical control was abruptly destroyed by the very elegance she weaponized. The world heavily applauds those who dare to move without boundaries, but undeniable reality never yields to a flawlessly crafted illusion. Number 2. Martha Mansfield, the careless match that stole a rising star's future. Martha Mansfield possessed an ethereal on-screen radiance that effortlessly captivated the roaring silent film era.
She was a definitive Ziegfeld Follies sensation, a mesmerizing theatrical prodigy who successfully transitioned into a highly lucrative cinematic darling. Studio executives heavily invested in her immaculate porcelain features, eagerly marketing a flawless ingenue who reliably guaranteed massive box office returns. The industry enthusiastically draped her in extravagant period costumes, projecting an aura of pristine invincibility that firmly established her as a permanent fixture in the Hollywood aristocracy. This meticulously crafted trajectory unraveled instantly on an active movie set in Texas. Resting in a parked vehicle between takes for a sprawling historical epic, the 23-year-old actress sat completely engulfed in the voluminous ruffles of a highly flammable Civil War-era gown. Without warning, a carelessly discarded match from a passing bystander drifted directly into the fragile fabric of her elaborate costume. The incredibly combustible material ignited instantaneously, transforming a routine production delay into a blinding, inescapable blaze that enveloped the helpless star before crew members could adequately react. Leading man Wilfred Littell frantically rushed into the catastrophe, successfully smothering the flames with his heavy overcoat in a desperate bid to save her recognizable face. Despite his courageous intervention and immediate transport to a nearby medical facility, the catastrophic burns sustained across her body proved entirely irreversible. She succumbed to the severe trauma less than 24 hours later, abruptly terminating a brilliant career that was fully poised to dominate the cinematic decade. The most elaborate studio illusions remain ultimately defenseless against a single, reckless spark. Number 1. Tony Knight. The freak nature accident that stunned a crowd. Tony Knight carved a remarkably unique niche across international stages, blending razor-sharp comedic timing with an uncanny mastery of canine behavior. He was a highly sought-after television presence whose sold-out live seminars captivated global audiences. Networks aggressively packaged his rugged, approachable charm, presenting a seasoned professional who effortlessly tamed wild domestic animals while commanding roaring laughter from packed auditoriums. The media built a pristine brand around his intuitive connection to nature, projecting an entertainer completely in sync with the physical world. A seemingly idyllic outdoor festival abruptly shattered that harmonious illusion during a public appearance in southern France. Standing amidst a bustling crowd of fans, the celebrated personality was violently struck by a massive collapsing tree branch that plummeted from the canopy above without warning. There were no reckless stunts, no high-speed collisions, and no scandalous industry betrayals to blame for the devastation. An entirely random, catastrophic environmental failure instantly transformed a joyous, sun-drenched celebration into a chaotic scene of unthinkable panic and desperate emergency intervention. First responders frantically battled to revive the beloved broadcaster, but the sheer blunt force of the unpredictable strike proved entirely irreversible. The 54-year-old talent was pronounced deceased, leaving devoted followers completely stunned by the sheer statistical impossibility of his sudden demise. Memorials quickly flooded social media, forcing a grieving entertainment sector to process how a man who dedicated his life to understanding the natural world was ultimately destroyed by its blind weight. The brightest spotlights cannot predict the terrifying moments when the physical environment abruptly collapses the stage. Fame constructs a fortress of lights and applause, yet leaves the person inside exposed to the most ordinary hazards. In the records of Hollywood stars and scars, these Hollywood scandals of abrupt endings expose a quieter truth: no pedestal shields against isolation or chance's indifference. True resilience begins with seeing, when the stage lights blind more than they reveal, and with the courage to choose human connection over the illusion of invincibility before the final cut arrives without warning. The applause dies long before the lights. What remains is the empty stage and the irreversible cost of the invincibility myth. These Hollywood scandals do not shout. They whisper through every closed door in faded reel that fame never rewrote the rules of chance. Subscribe to Hollywood Stars and Scars to unlock the next sealed vault, the files the cameras chose not to finish. The reel turns for those who refuse to look away. Stars burn